Hello, this is Father Hightower, and welcome to Vox SFX, the voice of St. Francis Xavier Parish in Missoula, Montana, and sponsored in part by the Foundation for the Diocese of Helena. We are so pleased that you have joined us. Your participation enriches our community. We hope that our show serves as a point of light, helping to deepen our understanding and experience of the Catholic faith and history. Join us as we seek, through prayer, study, interviews, and discussion, the roots of our ancient mysteries.
Hello, and welcome to Vox SFX, the voice of St. Francis Xavier Parish in Missoula. I am Nicholas Briard, and I am so thrilled that you could be with us today. Today we're going to be speaking with Father Kirby Longo, who is the head pastor over at Christ the King here in Missoula, and it is the nearest of the parishes here to the university. He runs something there called the Newman Center, and by and large its purpose is to do outreach with college students and provide them with the support and love and care that a lot of people need during that time. You know, college is a stressful time, and it keeps getting more and more stressful for young people. I was only there recently myself for the second time around, and even without taking a full load, it can seem like a lot. There's a lot of overwhelming homework, there's a lot of overwhelming projects to be working on, and it can start to feel like one is drowning a little bit. And one of the wonderful things that the church provides is a sense of center, is a place of stability, a place where one can have a buoy in the storm. And so Father Kirby's mission on campus is one of great import, from what I can tell, because, wow, you know, there's some folks there that really need it. And it's good to make sure that we're trying to reach them there, too. I have a friend who I've been talking to recently, and she's becoming more and more interested in, you know, Catholic life, going to church and being a part of our community. And it's funny because she went to a couple of Jesuit universities when she was coming up and when she was receiving her education. And so as I've been talking about some of the things that Catholicism has to offer, she's been kind of kicking herself a little bit for not having participated in it when she was younger. That center of balance and stability that I had talked about, which people sorely need when they are in college. And so there is no Newman Centers on Jesuit campuses because they already have a Catholic presence there. But the idea is still the same, making sure that we're trying to reach people and give them something that can help nourish their souls while they're working so hard on making their futures more bright. And the other big thing that being a part of the church or even one of these programs when you're going to school is that sense of community. You know, in our age, there is something what is called virtual isolation. And it's when folks are entirely too centered on mechanical things, apps, social media, just YouTube and that sort of thing. And while it may feel social, it actually isn't, clinically speaking. And loneliness and depression are at a huge height, not just for the majority of folks these days in these uncertain times, but also especially for younger people. There's a sense of disconnect, a sense of isolation and loss. And so Father Kirby is doing a very noble thing indeed by bringing the light of Christ to these folks, by bringing that sense of community, that invitation to the table to say, you're not alone. All of your brothers and sisters have been waiting here for you at the Lord's table, and you are welcome to come and join us. And so I think Father Kirby says it best, so I'm going to let him say it, but let's talk a little bit about his walk with Christ and the mission of the Newman Center on the campuses of America. With us in the studio today is Father Kirby Longo, head priest at Christ the King and the director, chaplain of the Newman Center. Father, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we're always happy to, of course, keep including folks from around the area. There's a whole conversation to be had with all of us in all the different parishes. So it's wonderful to be able to include Christ the King in this as well. Just as a personal thing, did you know that I started off my Catholicism at Christ the King?
Oh, no way.
I did.
You went to the U?
I did.
Nice.
And actually, I had a friend who was Catholic in high school, and his parents went to Christ the King, and so I ended up starting going there. And I settled on St. Francis Xavier because there was a pretty girl that went here.
Oh, nice.
But
That's great.
no, I love the setup that y'all have over there. It's very welcoming, and I imagine it's a good scene for some of these young people coming in.
Yeah, that's been the effort. We've got a good cross-section of generations. I think it's been good to see everyone to getting to know each other better. It's not necessarily natural. We've kind of had to fight for it, but it's been really fruitful to see how it's been going, especially as the campus ministry grows. So there's been a lot of older folks in the parish jumping in more and getting to know them, and then kind of learn what it is to be Catholic after they leave too. So yeah, it's been really fruitful.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'd love to get more into that. Before we do so, I'd love for our audience to know a little bit more about you, Father Kirby. What's your story?
I was raised Methodist. My mother was a Methodist, or is a well, actually she's not anymore. She's Catholic now. She was a Methodist. My dad grew up Catholic, but my mom raised us in the Methodist church. They did send us to Catholic schools in Billings. I'm from Billings originally. They sent us to Billings Central Catholic School, which was incredible. I loved being there, mainly at first because of the sports. I was kind of a sports fanatic growing up. As I went along, I just grew typical teen years, questioning everything. Our Methodist church, each time we got a new pastor, things seemed to change sort of drastically in a theological way. All really good guys. But as I kind of got to the point where I just was questioning of the faith in general, my answer to that was, first, I went and partied for a while, and then that didn't really make me happy. So then I started looking into the history of the church because I was like, well, I need to figure out which church is right about all this. I happened to be going to Catholic school anyways, so that was on the table. But basically at the time it was only on the table because that's where I happened to be.
The proximity.
Yeah, proximity, yeah. I didn't feel it to be a super compelling option at first. And then the more I looked into, especially the early church, I was like, man, this is all pretty Catholic. So I guess I'd say I had an intellectual conversion, kind of middle of high school, but still was caught up in, party scene and chasing girls, and sports was definitely at the center of my life. Then it was kind of the end of my junior year of high school. I had a really good friend who sat me down and just called me out and just said, hey, you talk a big game now. You talk about how the Catholic Church is legit and it's true, but you're not living that way, and you need to stop being a hypocrite. And that was a really good thing for me to receive. He was just a really good man, still good friends to this day. That call out was good for me. And then I was like, okay, I should probably actually figure this out. And then it was actually shortly after that, my senior year, we'd had a really good football season. I was feeling kind of on top of the world. And then for whatever reason, sucked at basketball. Since sports was my life and my identity, I kind of started to crumble, not having that identity anymore as something that was fulfilling. And so every day after practice, I just found myself going to this adoration chapel in Billings and praying. Mainly started praying just that I'd stop sucking at basketball, because that was like my life. And it was also my plans for college was basketball. So after a while, the prayer stopped being about that and started being more about just coming to know the Lord. And then since that was happening in the context of adoration before the Blessed Sacrament, before the Eucharist, I was like, man, there's probably something to this too. God is here in a way that I've never experienced him. And so I figured I'd better actually become Catholic if that's something that's so fruitful in my spiritual life. And that's definitely like a huge summary of the story. But my senior year of high school, became Catholic, wanted to go to seminary immediately because I don't know if it was some vanity there or if I was just really pumped up and I was like, what's the next step? Thank God my mom threw down on that and said, it's one thing if you become Catholic, but you're not also going to go become a priest. I need grandkids. So I ended up settling on Carroll College. I was playing basketball in the gym one day, and the priest at Carroll College, also another Billings guy, well, he's at the cathedral now, Father Mark Lenneman. We were playing basketball together, and he was like, what are you doing for college? And I said, I don't know, because my whole world's just been kind of thrown into disarray because I no longer am choosing what my future is. I want to leave that up to God, but kind of in a decision point. He's like, well, come to Carroll. And I said, why come to Carroll? And he said, because it's Catholic. And I was like, I didn't even know that. Went to Carroll. I started discerning priesthood there more seriously. And by the end of undergrad, felt the call to at least go check out seminary. And then from there, the Lord just kind of led me step by step to ordination. The call became more certain as I went. I was sent to Butte for my first 3 years, and then over here to Christ the King after that, and been here ever since, 4 years.
Oh, outstanding.
Yeah.
You went the diocesan route. Many of the priests that we've had on the show have been priests of an order, and in particular, priests who are of the Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus. What's the difference between somebody who goes that route and somebody who goes the way of a diocesan priest?
So being from Montana, one of the things that led me to stay in Montana for college was that I realized at the end of high school that I just loved this place and I never wanted to leave. And I had to fall in love with the place of Montana. And that's one of the beautiful things about the diocesan priesthood is that order, depending on where your order's from or where they have missions, you can be sent to any of those missions. So in a sense, you're tied to that order. With a diocesan priesthood, it's more that you're tied to a geographical place and to a bishop. So when I was ordained, I promised obedience to Bishop George Leo Thomas and his successors. So I'm promising obedience to whoever happens to be the bishop of the Helena Diocese, which is the western third of Montana. Be in the western third of Montana for the rest of my life. I felt a particular call to this place from the Lord. I thought about the Carmelites. There's an awesome order down in Wyoming. I didn't feel the call to a full contemplative life. I thought about the Franciscans. I went to a CC, and I feel like anyone who goes to a CC probably wants to be a Franciscan afterwards. That call was more just, it wasn't artificial, but it was definitely rooted in just being in a CC, and it didn't stay for very long. I never really seriously considered anything other than diocesan because my call from the Lord always felt like it was to this place and the people here in Montana. And been super joyful. That's the main difference, is that tie to the place and the people there rather than a tie to a particular order and a charism. Diocesan priesthood also has its own sort of charism in the life of the parish and in giving the sacraments to the people of that parish. So there's a particular tie there to the parish.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm stoked that you chose the Helena Diocese, but you said you were from Billings. Why this part of Montana?
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one. Part of it is that I was a Catholic in the Eastern Diocese for approximately 3 months before leaving. My home came to be really Carroll College and the community there, but also I never really got to know the priests of the Eastern Diocese. And then while I was at Carroll, I got to know a lot of really awesome priests from this diocese. And then part of it at the time, I would say, was my love of the outdoors for sure. You know, as I get older, I'm like, I think I would have come to love Eastern Montana for sure. But mainly the pull was partly, I had a fear of being alone as a priest. And there were definitely at the time a lot of sort of Lone Ranger priests in the Eastern Diocese, not because they necessarily chose it, but because geographically it's so huge and you could end up, you know, on the High Line by yourself with 7 parishes. And that terrified me.
Montana.
Yeah, you have a 400-mile route. I mean, there's some guys in our diocese that definitely have that, which is, you know, they really have to fight for that fraternity. But I saw a good group of men who were discerning priesthood or entering into priesthood who I found myself already to be brothers with. We have great fraternity here, and it's blessing. This is where my heart was as a Catholic, and partly I think the Lord was protecting my heart in that way, like calling me to a place where I would find fraternity easily and have it, and so it's protecting my vocation in that way. So yeah, there's a definite tension, you know, with some of the guys I know who I'm good friends with in the Eastern Diocese, because it has been a little bit of a trend there's a lot of Billings guys who have come over. And I don't know what the Lord's doing with that, but I trust him in it.
I think the Lord is sparing people from those Eastern Montana winters, I think.
Yeah. It's a particular place. And the guys who take on that call are heroic and awesome. And I know a lot of them, and they're great dudes. But yeah, there definitely needs to be a call specifically to that geographic place too for guys if they're going to thrive in the midst of that. Yeah.
Well, and what you're doing here is extremely important because Christ the King is located extremely close to campus. In fact, as far as I know, it's the closest parish that we have to the campus, which means that when we have people coming in who are from that age, most likely they're going to be coming to Christ the King. But it's not just younger people. Like you said, there's all sorts of different age groups that go to your church.
I guess the definition, I think, canonically is a personal parish. So actually our geographical boundaries, our canonical boundaries are the University of Montana, our property, and then whoever wants to come is allowed to come. So it began as an outreach of St. Anthony's to the campus. So it was basically the St. Anthony's Newman Center. And then they built the church, and it just kind of naturally became a parish. A lot of people who had gone to the university stayed, raised their families there. And so it took on the parish. I don't know exactly when it was born as a parish. I think 1968 was when it was established as a parish. Mm-hmm. But since then, it's been the students and then whoever feels the call to serve in that ministry. So then definitely a dynamic there where it's like not necessarily going to have all the elements of a full parish in terms of RE or anything like that. We're building some of that up more and more. It's definitely people who feel the call to be with the students in the midst of their growth. And so that's kind of the dynamic of it. But yeah, there's a few other, I think Resurrection and Bozeman's the same setup. And then actually when I was in seminary, I was placed in Boulder at the CU campus parish there, and it was exactly the same thing. So that was actually a really big blessing to be there, see how they navigated those two worlds and brought them together and kind of take what I learned from that and bring it to University of Montana. Yeah.
Sure. So when we're talking about the University of Montana, so far our listeners are going to be familiar with several of the terms that we're using. They likely know what a diocese is at this point, priesthood, of course, church, parish, but Newman Center. That's a new one for our listeners.
Yeah.
Would you mind explaining that real quick?
Absolutely. Newman Center's, unless I'm completely mistaken, John Henry Newman, who's the patron saint of college students and their studies. The Newman Center is named after him and is a place specifically at public universities. So obviously Catholic universities are going to have their own campus ministry sort of built in to their model. But the public university, it's just the place that serves the students of the public university who are Catholic or, God willing, who want to be Catholic. And so we begin our outreach there. And we have an interesting setup. It's not interesting in the sense that it's become pretty common. We have 4 focused missionaries. Fellowship of Catholic University Students is the organization. Their whole mission is to serve on campus, meet students, start Bible studies, and help those students enter into discipleship. So when I got there, there had been a lot of struggle, and it was also right in the midst of the COVID. So we came in knowing one student. We had one contact card for a student at the university.
Wow.
Which was quite a place to start. And I knew a couple of incoming freshmen who weren't even at the time Catholic. But we started from there and have done outreach. And I think at this point, we've got about 140 students who are in Bible studies or are part of the campus ministry in some ways.
Wow.
So it's been great to see the growth. Definitely, we always know there's a need for the gospel in the world, but the response has been incredible by the students. It's been great to work with them. It's mainly a very particular outreach to the students. And I guess I'll just touch on this. So I've in the last 4 years, as I bring it more concretely into what exactly we do, I've come up with a sort of 4-tiered system. And the first would be just general, like big outreach. So not even specifically Catholic necessarily. We do like a block party. We do a Friendsgiving where we serve a bunch of kids Thanksgiving dinner. We have all these events like Super Bowl parties. So things that aren't necessarily specifically Catholic. We have what we call the Grizz Catholic Adventure Series. So we go to a yurt in the fall and do a backpacking trip out there. We do a ski retreat. We call it ski retreat, but it's skiing together in fellowship. That's like 4 days over Christmas break. And then we do an end of year trip where we either go down to Moab for 5 days, mountain bike, climb, and hike. This year we're floating the Missouri River Breaks for 5 days. So those are kind of our big outreach events. We have a few more as well, meeting students where they're at. The next level would be drawing them into a Bible study, inviting them in to small group setting. It's a little more intimate. It's not just going to church. You're meeting people. You're becoming friends. Like the person who invites you in already knows you.
Sure.
Then that's the next thing. And then the third would be inviting them a little deeper, maybe a retreat, entering a little deeper into their prayer life, and then also teaching them what does it look like on a very concrete level, day-to-day life, how to be a Christian. And then the fourth would be kind of true discipleship, which is really one-on-one, or like what does that look like in terms of being a disciple on an individual level. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the 4 tiers, I guess, of what we do, which I think has been really cool and fruitful to see the way that students enter in. The fascinating part is students will go to a Bible study before they'll go to Mass. That's new. That seems new to me in terms of we don't have like a lot of casual Mass goers here. At Carroll, I saw that even 15 years ago when I was there. But now it's generally they'll get into a Bible study before they'll go to Mass, as if they're not Catholic.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it helps to some Christian concepts, some Catholic concepts can be hard to grasp for those of us who didn't grow up Christian or didn't grow up Catholic. So I think that might be part of the draw is like, I'm not sure where I am. I'm not quite sure. This is a disorienting place. I want to talk to somebody who I trust, somebody I already know, and kind of get the lay of the land. Like, what is this? Mm-hmm. When we're looking at who you're serving with this ministry, arbitrary percentage. How many do you think were Catholic before coming and participating, and how many have become Catholic through their participation?
Man, I'd have to look at our actual numbers, but I would say students we meet on campus and invite into Bible studies. So, for example, I lead a Bible study with the football players at U of M, and that one maybe 50% Catholic, 50% non-Catholic, and that number might be higher non-Catholic than general, just because of it's like become kind of a part of a lot of the football guys invite their buddies in. A lot of them, a lot of guys go over to Anchor for church on Sundays, but they come to our Bible study. I'd say the last 4 years, we have 5 to 6 students coming into the church each year who jumped into our Bible studies, and then probably another 5 to 10 each year who grew up Catholic and hadn't really been practicing their faith at all, but had come back through that. In general, the students who are coming to Bible studies consistently, coming to Mass consistently, probably did grow up Catholic, but it's probably only 2/3.
Okay.
So yeah, we're meeting a lot. U of M, I think the Catholic percentage there technically is 1 to 2%. It's pretty low by U.S. standards, even by Montana standards.
Sure. Well, then I imagine that for young Christians, for young people everywhere, there are some unique challenges posed in the year 2024, and I imagine that you've noticed some of that with these guys on campus, some of these unique struggles that they have.
At least amongst the students, the hardest thing would be, well, actually, I'd say the initial impression, I've never gotten like a negative reaction to me on campus in my collar. It's always positive or curious, at least. Sure. So that's been surprising. Given that
a whole lot of people have seen a priest in the wild.
Yeah. More than anything, it's usually like, what are you? You know, what is that thing? That's kind of a weird looking outfit you got going there. Or they'll be like, are you a real priest? And so I don't know what else I would be, but style's gotten kind of interesting. There is an initial impression, at least from maybe what people just hear in the news or have heard growing up, that Catholicism doesn't go with our culture very well. And so there's probably some getting over that initial reaction. In terms of challenges, our culture has gotten to the point where it doesn't have a lot of positive things to offer. It has a lot of critiques and maybe some good critiques, but I think that's where we're meeting a lot of openness, is that, you know, there's been the tearing down of certain structures that maybe needed to be torn down, whatever. There's not a lot of where do I go for meaning in my life. There's not a lot of good answers to that. And so if we can approach it there with kids, like what is it that you like, where are you going to find your joy and your fulfillment? Like, what does that look like for you? Then I think there's been a really good openness to God and what he has planned for our life. So that's getting to that conversation is interesting. Reaching that place, it's almost entirely just like friendships. You gotta start with friendship and relationship. No one wants to hear, I guess I'd say, like cold, hard gospel apart from friendship today. And I think that's fine.
Hands of an angry God.
Yeah. What's Paul VI line? The people will listen to a witness before they'll listen to a teacher, and they'll only listen to a teacher if he's a witness. Something like that. That's probably a paraphrase, but
that sounds good to me.
Yeah.
No, and I think, especially in this day and age, that sort of fellowship, that sort of community is what people are hungry for. I know psychologists have noted, especially in people younger than us, a phenomenon known as virtual isolation. When they have such a social life that is wrapped up on their phones or social media, that even though it feels like they have people nearby, it still creates this incredible emptiness inside people. It's a depression phenomenon that's been observed across, I know, younger members of our generation, but certainly Gen Z. I can only think that the kind of fellowship and community that you're offering through these programs are a lifeline for a lot of these guys.
It's been interesting to see, like, we host a lot of what basically appear to be parties, and you walk in and you're like, this just seems like a party. And yet the experience, because we have a lot of the fraternity guys who are involved, and I've talked to a lot of them about it. It's awesome. Like, they'll come in, it'll feel just like a party, energy will be good, and part of it is that we don't throw like lame parties, we throw really good parties. But at the same time, the focus is entirely different. They'll realize pretty quickly, and I've gotten this feedback from a lot of them, that the party isn't about hooking up. It's not about alcohol. It's about a bunch of people getting together and actually genuinely having good conversation with each other and growing in friendship, which that is what that ought to be. And there's such a lack of that it's a party oriented toward real relationship, that has been where we've seen a lot of really good fruit. And with the digital isolation stuff, it's like, smartphones are brutal, but at the same time, they're so fleeting. like everything on there, everything that occupies us in those things is so fleeting that like you just get people back into like a genuine atmosphere of real relationship, and they'll just snap out of it almost immediately. I don't see the effects as long term if someone can have that experience of the real thing, like the real relationship. Then all of the whole like depression and isolation caused by that seems to sort of go away. And that doesn't mean that it's not still a real struggle,
Sure.
but it just means that like you just gotta sort of help them to taste what real relationship is, and then they'll at least begin the battle against the fake offering that is the digital world. So that's been a huge part of what we do, and part of the reason why we go on retreats and adventures out in the wilderness. Like then you get a solid 3 days where it's just not an option because we don't have service. It's been a great thing about Montana. It's not even an option to be on your phone. Yeah.
Well, that's outstanding. And the stuff you do over there, like you said, you have the Super Bowl parties, you have other, like the adventures, but some of your stuff isn't quite that high impact either. Like I went to a bingo night this last summer that was just a hoot. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm fairly certain I saw you there. We didn't get to know each other very bad there, but you may have noticed the guy with the cane going up to get the wave board.
Oh, yeah.
That was me.
Awesome. Yeah, you won that was like the best prize we gave away, and we didn't even get one that cool this time.
My wife loves it, by the way.
That's great. Yeah, I'm huge on Catholic culture. Like what does it mean for us to have a Catholic culture? I think everyone talks about like going back to the 50s because we had Catholic culture, and I don't think that was true. I think up until maybe the 50s, 60s, what we had was like Italians who happened to be Catholic, Irish who happened to be Catholic, Polish who happened to be Catholic. I don't think that was Catholic culture in the way that we think of it now, because once they lost that ethnic identity, once they just became American, then they also lost their Catholic culture because it was tied in with their ethnic identity.
Sure.
I think we're just now learning what it means to be sort of American and Catholic, and have a culture that's like actually tied in with who we are as a whole. And not just like an ethnic identity that we brought over from where we were before. And so bingo, it's like, oh man, it was invented by a bunch of Catholics, I think in Wisconsin. So it's like, oh, that's great Catholic culture. We do an Oktoberfest. Each month we have at least one big sort of feast in the parish that's like full parish that, students and parishioners come to. And we do that in the hopes of building up this, what it means to be Catholic together as a parish. Mm-hmm. I think it's been really good. Each solemnity we have a party afterwards, just to get people into the liturgical calendar. And then on top of that, we just try to get together in that way as often as possible so that our whole year can begin to flow with the liturgical calendar, and the church can become the center of our life in a way that's not artificial. It's just natural to who we are, that becomes like a place where our friends actually are, rather than, we have sort of our private life and then like our church life, and never the two shall meet. I want to break through that and actually get real friendships going. I mean, the early Christians, it was like, look at the way they love each other. That was the witness to people. Like they actually care for each other in very concrete ways. It actually impacts the way they live their daily life. It impacts the way they spend their money. It impacts the way they, like who they hang out with. And there's true charity there. We can't really have that. We can't like force that. Real friendships are what create that. And so I want the parish to be that place. And I think it's been really cool that 4-tier thing also kind of, we do it in the parish level. And so I'm still trying to figure out like what it means to have a Catholic culture, but I think we're, trying to make steps toward that. And it's been really cool.
Like you said, we're adjusting to it. Up until the presidency of Kennedy, we weren't very well thought of in this country. We didn't have a whole lot of legitimacy. And then suddenly Kennedy came to be the president. It was like, oh, Catholics are okay. Those Irish Catholics, we can deal with them now. But yeah, you're right. Our culture is not as embedded here. And so moving forward is important, because we can't go back to the 50s. We don't have a time machine. Mm-hmm. So what does Catholic life look like going forward? What do our communities look like going forward? Because God didn't make us to be isolated individuals all by ourselves. He made us to live together. And you look at those early Christian communities like you were talking about, and they weren't, only coming together for Mass once a week and then never talking to each other. They lived together. They shared everything, and they were boon companions to one another. And I think it's admirable trying to kind of recreate that environment.
There's actually a lot of the students, and especially young adults, will joke about Kirbonomics.
Because
I've been really diving into Catholic social teaching in the very concrete sense of the word. Like, what does it mean for us to live life together? Easy example. A lot of the young families in our parish, it's like they'd love to stay here, but what does it look like living in Missoula as a young couple unless you're just rolling? And so how can we do that? What's like a really practical way in which we can actually get young families into homes. What does that look like? It's going to look like heroic charity from some of our older couples who can manage that. And so like, how do we build a culture in which an older family actually wants to help a younger family get into a home in an affordable way? That's going to take sacrifice on one end or the other, probably both. And then what does it look like trying to actually get active politically on the most local level? I'm a huge fan of local politics. I'm a huge hater of national politics. I don't think that's really helpful. There is just such a deeply ingrained, one thing we do have as Americans, Catholic or not, is a deeply ingrained individualism that like is probably the problem is more like a refusal to receive charity than to give charity. I feel like we actually do have a good sense of what helping others is, but we have this really dysfunctional sense of like receiving something heroic from someone else. And so there's this desire not to be dependent on anyone. I don't think that's Catholic. So it's just kind of like, how do we maneuver that? How do we move forward that in that way into the future? Because it's going to be necessary. Or I'm just going to keep, after the second kid, I'm just going to keep losing couples back to the Midwest where they're from or wherever they're from because they can afford something back there. We're trying to get real concrete with it. And there's a lot of ideas floating around, but it's just a matter of whether, who wants to let the first experiment happen and who's willing to enter into it and see if that works. Otherwise, a few of the couples, they've had to move down in the like Corvallis, Hamilton area because that's where they could afford a place.
Right.
And then that really is a hindrance. They're being heroic with it, but it's like every time they want to enter into something in the parish, it's an hour drive both ways.
And in the winter, really, that's asking something.
Yeah, it gets really hard. So I don't know. There's a lot up in the air, and hopefully we can come forward with something concrete. I don't think it looks like, I don't want it to be isolationist either. We don't want to isolate ourselves. I'm not a big Benedict option guy. Just moving out of the city, kind of creating our own little thing and then coming back in later. That's not my vibe, but I do think I get accused of all kinds of, whether I'm not a communist, I'm not a socialist, but the early Christians, they weren't either of those, but they were something, Well,
they didn't have those terms all the way back then, but they, like we said, they took care of each other.
They did.
They made sure that everybody had some place to be and something to eat, and trying to bring some of that back and make sure that we're taking care of each other as Catholics, as Americans, as citizens of this world.
Yeah.
I think that's an important message. And like you were just talking about, your parish faces a unique challenge in that you have a transient population. You've got college students and other folks who may just be here temporarily, who are kind of coming and going. St. Francis Xavier here, we've got a much older population in general. They're entrenched. This is where they live. They've got their families. They've got their livelihoods, and this is their parish. Whereas, for Christ the King, with a lot of these college students, they're in flux. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm a recruit or die kind of guy, so I pretty much try to recruit everyone to stay. But that is definitely part of the reality. The big thing that I want, especially the students who are going to roll through and then leave, to see, and one of the great advantages of having a Newman Center that's also a parish, is I want them to at least see amongst our young adults and older couples and established families that living the faith beyond college is possible, and see really how to do that. So as long as they can enter in a way that they see that and they get a sort of idea of what that looks like, then I think that'll be fruitful. And then we'll send them out, and hopefully they'll have a sort of thriving Catholic life out in the world wherever they go. And that's fine. That's just a part of the reality of who we are. Hopefully those relationships will bear fruit down the road. I'm definitely a fan of like just trying to keep as many of them as possible. That's not possible often, and it's not even like something they want often, but that's fine. The difficulty is we are kind of, by the standards of parishes I've been in, pretty rockin' in terms of like day-to-day things, ways to enter in, the ability to enter in. Like there's not a lot of closed doors in terms of people trying to hold down their little fiefdom of whatever ministry they have.
Sure.
So there's a lot of openness. I can't teach someone what it's like to go to a parish where that's not the case. So I think that will be a struggle no matter where they go, but hopefully they'll have a good enough foundation and an aggressive enough sort of attitude toward like, no, I'm going to start a Bible study here. Then that will hopefully carry forth. They can't really guarantee anything. Carroll College had a super healthy culture when we were there. It was awesome. I mean, the community was great. And a lot of my friends have since left. And if they've landed in a place where the parish isn't rocking, then they've kind of just faded. And that's really hard to see. I don't really know how to combat that. From Carroll's perspective, they couldn't because it's only students. They didn't even have an idea of what that looked like. We're trying to really move in on what does it look like serving, especially this population in between. You've got like students who have a lot of free time. They can jump in on anything.
Sure.
You've got the older couples, maybe empty nesters or their kids are older, a little more independent. They can jump in. that in between where you've got like the young adult in the young adult abyss, or you've got the young couples who are having their first and second kid and are just like overwhelmed. And then you've got the sort of 3 to 5 kids, or even just a couple, but they're older, they're in sports, they're super busy with all that. Those are populations where we're just kind of trying to figure out what that looks like. One of our focus missionaries is moving into the parish, so he's actually going to be doing basically the discipleship model, small group Bible studies, individual discipleship on the parish level now. I think that's honestly like a good step forward. I think it will bear great fruit in the parish. I actually think in some ways it's more stable in the parish than it is on campus, because your forming students, by the time they're ready to get their own Bible study going, they're maybe they don't get there. Maybe they're a senior. At best, they're a junior.
Sure.
They have 2 years to kind of do their own outreach and learn how to do that. In the parish, you have a much more sort of solid population who's going to be there long term. And so I think that discipleship model can actually grow and be more sustainable on that level. So I'm really excited about it. It will be flexible according to people's state in life, and they'll be able to enter in a cool new way that way. So that's kind of our attempt. That like 30 to 25 to 40 is a really tough age group to figure out what their spiritual life looks like and how to engage them. But that's our next project, I guess, step in the parish. But we have a solid group in that age group. A lot of new firstborn, like first children. What that's going to look like when kid number 2 comes, kid number 3 comes. That's where life gets pretty wild. Start playing zone defense with 3 kids, and then life gets pretty interesting. Getting out of the house is an endeavor. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, it looks like we're coming toward the end of our time there, Father. Did you have anything else you wanted to say before we end for the day?
This was something I was looking to chat about for a second. We're hitting this interesting place, and I was just talking to a couple of the guys from Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic Leadership, Catholic University students, kind of higher ups about this. We're coming to this interesting place where for a while it was cool, like especially in our campus ministry, we were just like being Catholic. It was enough of a thing that there was no, I don't want to say like being a certain type of Catholic wasn't really like anything that anyone desired.
Sure.
But I find as we grow, I didn't know if this would happen at University of Montana, but now we're getting this sort of like, not only do I want to be Catholic, but I want to be a certain type of Catholic. And navigating that has been really interesting.
Now, when you say certain type of Catholic, are we talking like the Benedictine, like?
No, I guess the interesting pull for a lot of young people, and I saw it in my own life, so I guess I should have expected it, was toward like traditionalism, or that actually seems to be basically the pull. Is I'm going to be a traditional Catholic. A traditional Catholic, sure, that's fine. There's this interesting pull toward, is the church enough, or do I need to kind of swing into the Catholic Church and then keep just swinging right on out into like SSPX or, Society of Pius X, Pius V, or any of that, or even just like, is the traditional Latin Mass the way forward? That's been interesting to see that kind of come on the horizon. And I honestly think that's probably going to be the tension in the church for the next 10 to 20 years.
Sure.
And there's partly just a reactionary element to that, but I think partly the desire for the mystery of the Mass, which I think is a good desire. So hopefully that can, how to move forward in terms of how we celebrate the Mass at Christ the King has been really interesting as I've talked to more and more of the students, staying faithful to it, but also meeting them in that desire for the mystery of it. Yeah, that's been a really interesting thing to navigate.
Well, I got one last question for you.
Sure.
And this is an important one. I need you to remember that your parishioners are listening, all your students on campus are listening, but as an Eastern guy, I got to ask you, Grizz or Cats?
Oh, Grizz.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is. You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Father Kirby.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Thank you. This is it's great that you guys are doing this and hopefully reaching more and more people as we go.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, God bless, sir.
Yeah, God bless. Peace.
Thank you for being with us today as we walk as pilgrims this road together. If you feel called to learn more, please consider checking out St. Francis Xavier or your local Catholic church. All are welcome into our community as God loves us all equally. If you are interested in supporting the Vox SFX podcast, please visit sfxmissoula.org/donate. Until next time, go forth in peace and be the light of Christ in someone's day.